Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip into something a little unexpected. Your bed. Or rather, the beds of medieval Europe, where people didn't just lie down and sleep straight through the night. No, back then, nighttime came in two acts. A first sleep, a mysterious waking period, and then a second sleep. Sounds odd? Well, brace yourself, because what you're about to discover might make your 3 a.m. wake-ups feel historically accurate. You're about to walk through a world lit only by flame, where people woke in the middle of the night and didn't think it strange. In fact, they planned for it. It was a lifestyle, not a sleep disorder. And let's be real. If you lived in a drafty wooden shack with lice in your mattress and a chamber pot under the bed, you probably wouldn't be getting 8 seamless hours either. You wouldn't last 1 week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with your time and location. I'd love to know when and where you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in darkness. Not the modern, quiet kind of dark. The hum of appliances, the faint blue haze of a router light somewhere in the room. Number this is a thick velvet dark, alive with a groan of beams overhead and the scent of straw packed beneath you. The fire has gone out. The embers hiss gently in the hearth. Your breath clouds in the cold, and yet this is normal. You're not alarmed. You've just finished your first sleep. It's sometime around midnight. You don't have a clock, but you can tell by the way the stars have shifted through the wooden slats in the wall. Maybe a rooster crows early. Maybe someone a few houses down is coughing. You pull your blanket tighter and sit up. Welcome to the Middle Ages. Here, sleep doesn't come all at once. It comes in 2 parts, like a theatrical performance with an intermission. People went to bed shortly after nightfall, maybe 7 or 8 in the evening. They'd sleep for a few hours, wake naturally sometime around midnight, and remain awake for 1 to 2 hours before drifting off again until dawn. This wasn't a fluke. It was the norm. And during that intermission, people didn't just toss and turn. Oh no, they got up, they prayed, they read, they stoked the fire, they talked, they made love, they checked on the animals. Some even went outside, yes, outside, in the freezing dark, to visit neighbors or to wander and think. It was so common that medieval manuscripts mentioned it in passing. Letters and diaries from the period refer casually to first sleep and second sleep, as if you'd be the weird one not doing it. One 15th century French physician even recommended that couples plan their bedroom time during the watch, that precious moment between sleeps when the body is rested, but the mind is still foggy and soft. Think of it as the medieval version of scrolling TikTok in bed, but with more candles and fewer cats. You step outside now, barefoot on packed earth. The village is mostly quiet, but not silent. A dog barks somewhere. You smell smoke. In another home, someone is softly singing. The stars blaze overhead, more vivid than you've ever seen them. No pollution, no streetlights, just sky. You remember what your body feels like when it's been allowed to sleep the way it wants to. Not forced into an artificial block of 8 hours, but gently, rhythmically, in tune with nature. Maybe this broken sleep isn't broken at all. It's strange, right? We think of history as backwards, dirty, harsh. But here's a truth. Their sleep, in some ways, might have been healthier than yours. Modern scientists have started to take this old pattern seriously. In the 1990s, a researcher named Thomas Ware experimented by plunging people into darkness for 14 hours a night. What happened? They naturally adopted a segmented sleep cycle. 2 distinct sleeps with a peaceful wakeful period in between. So maybe you're not insomniac, maybe you're just historically aligned. Still, not everyone agrees. Some historians debate how widespread the practice really was. Was it common everywhere, or just in certain parts of Europe? Did it change with the seasons? Did peasants follow it the same way nobles did? The records are incomplete, fragmented, like the sleep they describe. Scholars are still arguing over it. But here in this quiet moment, it doesn't matter. You lie back down and close your eyes. You feel safe. You know you'll sleep again soon. Maybe you even look forward to the next time you wake. Because in this world, midnight isn't a curse. It's a pause, a breath between dreams. The night is only half over. You sit there for a while, half wrapped in scratchy wool, listening to the house creak like an old man settling into himself. No one else is stirring, not yet. The others, your brothers, your cousin, the snoring uncle from the other village who never leaves, are still heavy in their first sleep. Their breaths rise and fall in rhythm like waves lapping at the wooden beams. But you're wide awake, and this is no accident. You're not anxious, you're not troubled. In fact, you feel peaceful, almost alert. It's like your body expects this moment. It's built for it, this midnight pocket of quiet where the world feels just yours. So what do you do? Well, in the Middle Ages, this moment, the hour or two between first and second sleep, wasn't wasted. It was revered. This was the hour of souls. You get up. The floor is cold beneath your feet, the packed earth smooth and familiar. You slip on a thick linen tunic, maybe even a fur wrap if you're fancy, or just really cold. Then you pad quietly to the hearth and nudge a log, coaxing the embers back to life. The glow flickers across the faces of saints on a wooden carving above the fireplace. Their expressions look different by firelight, less holy, more human. Now, you have options. You could pray. Many did. In fact, religious writers called this the watch, a holy window when God was said to be especially receptive. Monks, of course, made this official, rising dutifully for matins, one of the 7 canonical hours of the church. But for common folks like you, this was personal time, sacred, but yours. A 16th century English woman wrote that she loved these hours for prayer because the silence made her feel like all the world sleepeth save I and God. You feel that too, don't you? And it wasn't all solemnity and saintliness. Some people used the time to tend the fire, prepare herbs, or clean wounds. Others read or told stories. The wealthier you were, the more candles you could afford, and with candlelight came books, letters, maybe even embroidery. Imagine that, a whole society that carved time into the night just to be awake, together or alone, with no guilt. Of course, some folks had other ideas for how to pass the time. You open the door and step outside, drawn by the muffled sound of movement beyond the goat pens. It's your neighbor, Hamrick the miller, sneaking out barefoot again. His wife snored straight through his escape. Where's he going? You follow at a distance, cloak wrapped tight. The air is crisp, the moon hangs heavy and yellow like old cheese. Hamrick tiptoes down to the creek. You expect mischief? Maybe a sacred tryst? A pagan ritual? Nope. He's stealing fish from the traps. Again. Between first and second sleep, the laws were flexible. People moved through the dark like ghosts, doing things that daylight wouldn't tolerate. Small crimes, soft confessions, forbidden meetings, a time to break rules gently, wrapped in wool and plausible deniability. Even some noblemen were said to roam their estates during the watch, patrolling or pondering beneath the stars like gloomy philosophers in fur hats. For lovers, the watch was a gift. You return to the house and slip back into the room, careful not to wake your cousin who drools dramatically when face down. You hear whispers near the bedpost. It's your sister and her husband, having a quiet talk in the dark. They're not arguing, they're laughing. She tells him about a dream she had. He brushes her hair from her face. You pretend not to notice. This was prime time for intimacy, physical and emotional. Many medical writers even advised couples to be affectionate between sleeps when the body was warm and the soul loose and unguarded. Because, let's be honest, nothing feels more private than a secret conversation when the rest of the world lies asleep. And still, historians debate, was this universal? Did the watch exist everywhere? Some claim it was mostly a Western European practice. Others believe it spanned classes and regions. But regardless of where it occurred, the idea of it, the stillness, the pause, the invitation to exist gently, has been recorded again and again. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows. It's too early, but he's ambitious. Your body, sensing the shift, starts to wind down again. The warmth of the bed calls. You return to it with no rush, no panic. Sleep will come. You're not chasing it. You're welcoming it back like an old friend who's just stepped outside for a moment. You nestle under the blanket, now slightly warmed from the fire's breath. Outside, the wind rustles through bare trees. A dog barks once, then settles. The second sleep awaits, heavier, deeper, often dream-laced. And this intermission, it wasn't an inconvenience. It was a feature. Today, you might call it insomnia. Back then, they called it life. To be continued. The second sleep comes for you like fog over a quiet field. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock. It simply rolls in, cool, soft, and inevitable. Your body drifts back into the straw-stuffed mattress. The air smells like soot, wool, and faintly of onions from someone's dinner still clinging to the hearth. Not exactly lavender-scented melatonin spray, but you manage. Hours pass, and when the sun peeks through the slats in the wall, gold and gentle, you rise again, this time for good. But not everyone had a soft landing into the daylight. Not everyone even had their own bed. Tonight, we go somewhere a little different. You're walking down a muddy alley in a town that smells of dung and burnt bread. The year is 1323. Somewhere in England, or France. It doesn't really matter. The filth is universal. You duck into a tavern-inn hybrid, a medieval flop house. No reception desk, no bellboy, no privacy. Just straw on the floor, heavy blankets shared between strangers, and one blazing hearth in the middle that's both comforting and crawling with lice. You're not alone, far from it. People are snoring, coughing, rolling over. Some are already up, pacing through the between-sleep hours, scratching, mumbling, picking at old wounds or new scabs. You try not to stare. Beds are a luxury here. A single mattress might host 2, 3, even 4 strangers. Not family, not friends. Just whoever paid their copper and got there first. This was called double lodging, and it was common, necessary even. There's no do not disturb sign in the Middle Ages. You learn quickly to sleep with one eye open or one hand on your coin purse. You nestle in beside a man who smells aggressively of ale and regret. His breath is a weapon. Across from you, a couple argues quietly about who forgot to bank the fire. A dog whimpers near the door. Someone snores like a drowning bellows. But no one finds this odd. In fact, sharing beds was so ordinary that it became a social custom. Travelers often bunked together. Entire families, multiple generations, shared the same mattress. Even legal records from the time mentioned bedfellows as a totally respectable relationship between strangers. Imagine booking a hotel today and finding out you're bunking with 3 other guests and a goat. But back then, space was limited. Heat was precious and beds were expensive. A good feather bed could cost as much as a peasant made in a year. So people learned to make do. You roll over, pressing your back against a woman who smells faintly of sheep. Her hands are calloused, her breathing steady. She's asleep, and you envy her. Because here's a strange thing. People actually found comfort in sleeping this way. For many, it offered a rare kind of intimacy, a reminder that you weren't alone in a world full of plague, wolves, and unpaid tithes. It was a kind of accidental community, formed in the folds of patched linen and broken sleep. Still, there were risks. Bed sharing could lead to rumors, scandals, accusations. If you shared a bed with the wrong person, or the wrong gender, or someone's jealous cousin, you could find yourself at the center of a village drama. Or worse, a court case. One famous English legal record from the 14th century describes 2 men who shared a bed in an inn. One woke up without his purse. The other woke up in court. The historians still debate whether these situations were commonplace or rare. Was double lodging a necessity only for the poor, or did wealthier travelers do it too? Was it different in monasteries where dozens of monks might sleep in the same dormitory under a vow of silence? No one knows for sure, but the record is clear. People slept together, not always in the sexy way, often just in the please don't die of hypothermia way. You shift again, wrapping your cloak tighter. Someone farts explosively. You pray it wasn't the ale man. This isn't the sleep of kings. It's rough, noisy, public, but it's still sleep. And for many, it was all they had. The candles sputter lower. A rat scuttles across the floorboards above. Somewhere outside, church bells begin to ring. Not the matins bells. Those rang hours ago. This is prime. Morning prayers. Real wakefulness. You sit up, rubbing your eyes. Your back hurts. Your head feels stuffed with hay. But the woman beside you stretches and smiles. Good sleep, she asks, as if the answer could be yes. You nod. Because in truth, it wasn't the worst. You were warm. You weren't alone. And for a few hours, you escaped the chill and the hunger and the darkness. So maybe that was enough. You stand and shuffle toward the door, stepping carefully over the aleman, who has begun to drool into someone's shoe. The morning light is soft, the mud cold beneath your feet. The world smells of smoke and rising dough. And you? You're already thinking about your first sleep tonight, because in this time, in this place, sleep isn't just something you do. It's somewhere you go. And every night you take the journey all over again. The air outside is damp and cold, the kind that clings to your bones like a second skin. A faint mist curls around your ankles as you step out of the inn, and for a moment it's easy to believe that time itself is foggy here, thick with old routines and forgotten rhythms. You rub your arms, stretch your back, and think, anything's better than sleeping in that inn again. But not everyone has the luxury of even that. Tonight, you're going somewhere stranger, holier, and much, much colder. You're sleeping in a church, not because you've become devout, though who knows, maybe a midnight encounter with a saint might do you some good. But because in the Middle Ages, churches weren't just places of worship, they were shelters, sanctuaries in the literal sense, and in many towns, the only place where the very poor could safely sleep. You walk through the heavy wooden doors, your footsteps muffled by old rushes scattered across the stone floor. The air inside is thick with candle smoke and the faint perfume of dried flowers left on the altar days ago, and under it all, something else. The sour animal scent of bodies, dozens of them, lying in rows, cloaked in rags, pressed against stone columns, curled near flickering votive candles. These are the forgotten sleepers of the medieval city. You find a spot near a pillar. It's not comfortable. You pull your cloak tighter and sit with your back against cold, centuries-old stone. Above you, carved angels peer down from the rafters. You try not to think about how often pigeons roost there. Somewhere near the altar, a baby starts to cry, followed by a weary mother's whispered hush. The sound echoes up into the vaulted ceilings like a prayer gone sideways. Church sleep is different. It's not peaceful, it's not private, but it's sacred. Literally. In medieval lore, churches were places of sanctuary, where fugitives could avoid arrest, where the poor could find rest, where even a murderer might be safe if he reached the door fast enough and clung to the altar. You're not here for sanctuary, just a nap. But still, the weight of the place settles on your chest like the old choir robes hanging in the sacristy. Some of the other sleepers groan, turn over, mutter Latin half-dreams. A few are still in their waking hour between sleeps, hunched over candles, whispering to saints or just staring into the flickering dark. And rats. Yes, there are rats. One skitters past your foot. You tell yourself it's a mouse. It is not, but the people here are used to it. No one screams, no one flinches. Because in a world where so many things were worse, plague, starvation, public executions, a rat in the night is almost comforting. At least it means something is alive. You breathe in, slow, and now you start to notice the details. The way the wax melts down the iron sconces in slow, glistening rivulets. The way the stained glass windows catch the moonlight, even at this hour, and turn it into fractured colors that dapple the stone floor. You see a boy with a wooden bowl cradled in his lap like a treasure. You see a man with his boots still on, crossed at the ankles, head resting on a folded sack of grain. A woman with a rosary wound so tightly around her hand it must hurt. They're sleeping the same way everyone else does, in parts, in cycles. Only here, the watch hour becomes something else, survival. You wonder how many of them have names, how many will be gone tomorrow, how many came here hoping for a vision, a dream, a miracle, and how many just wanted not to freeze to death. In some cities, churches started limiting these overnight stays, locking their doors after Compline, the final prayer hour of the day. Too much noise, too many fights, too many unholy acts in the shadow of the crucifix. But in smaller towns, or on certain feast days, or during plagues, when no one dared turn away the sick, the doors often stayed open. And let's be honest, in the cold of February, even a holy building smells like a barn. Historians still debate whether churches truly welcomed the poor as sleepers, or merely tolerated them. Some believe this use of space was exaggerated by later accounts. Others say it was a vital part of medieval life, one we've conveniently erased. You're not a scholar, though. You're just tired. You lie down slowly, using your folded cloak as a pillow. The floor is unforgiving. Your ribs press against stone. Somewhere, a candle guttering out sends the scent of burnt tallow drifting past your nose. And then, you sleep. but not deeply. Every sound is sharp, every breath foreign. It's like sleeping in a train station if the train station also doubled as the home of God, and everyone around you was either praying or stealing your shoes. Still, for a moment, you dream. Not of angels, but of warmth. And in the Middle Ages, a nap was never just a nap. It was a declaration, a risk, a small, soft rebellion. You're walking into darkness again. Not the kind of darkness that simply lacks light, but the kind that feels alive, humming, breathing, the kind that creeps beneath your skin and whispers in your ear. You're not safe, because tonight you're inside a castle under siege. The drawbridge is up, the gates are barred. Outside, in the distance, you hear the steady thud of siege engines, those lumbering wooden monsters that hurl boulders through the night like angry gods with poor aim. You're not a knight or a noble, not even a soldier, just caught, a servant, a cook's helper, a child of no one, stuck inside a fortress that's slowly turning into a tomb. And sleep. Sleep is no longer something you do, it's something you dodge. The castle is cold. Not elegant, not noble. Just stone and wind and fear. You lie curled in the corner of a kitchen storeroom, surrounded by sacks of grain and broken clay pots. It smells like dried onions and mice. Somewhere above, you hear boots. Shouting. Another impact. You count the seconds between each crash. You tell yourself the war will hold. You tell yourself lies. And eventually, your body shuts down. Not into sleep exactly, but into a kind of hovering state. Half dream, half alert. Your ear always open, your fingers curled, ready to flee. Your legs twitching before your mind can even tell you why. You're not alone in this. During sieges, people slept in shifts, short, tense bursts, often in their clothes, with weapons close. In noble halls, guards dozed upright beside fireplaces. Children huddled beneath tables. The rhythm of the medieval two-sleep system. Abandoned. When the enemy pounds at your walls all night, you don't get first sleep and second sleep. You get fragments. If that. You rise now, rubbing your eyes. Someone nearby has stirred. A knight, grim-faced, sits on the edge of a bench, sword across his lap, eyes half closed. He's muttering to himself. You step over a sleeping dog and push open a heavy wooden door. Outside in the courtyard, soldiers lie in heaps. Not dead, just exhausted. Armor off. Mud-caked. One man snores into his gauntlet. Another lies curled beside a pile of arrows. It's not graceful. It's not glorious. It's survival. People slept wherever they could, in stairwells, in stables, even standing up if needed. A woman nearby is rocking a baby. She's not singing. She's just rocking back and forth like a metronome that forgot the tune. The child isn't crying. It's too tired to cry. Somewhere, a pot boils. A meal for the next watch. Or maybe the last. And yet, amid the tension, there are odd moments of quiet. You sit now beside a young archer. He offers you a piece of hard bread. Chews thoughtfully, then says, "It's easier to dream when you know you might not wake up." And you understand, in siege time, sleep is unpredictable. It becomes ritual. Refuge. Sometimes, the only place you still feel like a person. A few accounts from medieval sieges mention strange shared dreams. Entire groups reporting visions, omens, saints. Was it hysteria, a starvation, or something else? Historians still debate the records. Some dismiss them as folklore. Others point to the psychological effects of stress and deprivation. But the stories persist. You lie back, resting your head against a bundle of cloaks. The stars above are hidden behind smoke. The wind tastes like ash. But just before your eyes close, you hear music. Faint, broken, a lute stringed poorly, somewhere in the high tower. Someone's playing, singing maybe. You don't know the song, but it's beautiful, and for a moment, everything else falls away. The war, the walls, the hunger, the fear. You drift, not into first sleep, not into second sleep, but into something else entirely. A siege sleep. Shallow, strange, sacred. You dream of light. When you wake, it's still dark, still loud, still dangerous. But you carry the dream with you. And in this world, that might be enough. The siege is over now, at least for you. You've walked far from the castle walls, past burned-out villages and cold, forgotten fields. You've slept in haystacks and riverbanks, or tried to. But tonight, your luck changes. You found a bed, a real one. You step into the room like you're entering a temple. A four-poster beast of a thing stands in the center, its wooden frame groaning softly under its own age. The mattress is thick, lumpy in odd places, and smells vaguely of lavender, dust, and centuries. You approach cautiously, like it might speak, and in a way it does. This bed has history, not the kind written down, the kind worn into the linen. Scratches along the frame from where someone carved a heart. A stain on the corner, ink or wine or blood, who knows? A sag in the center where years of bodies curled, dreamt, and died. Beds in the Middle Ages weren't just furniture. They were characters in the story. They were expensive, a symbol of status, the centerpiece of the room. Sometimes the only real furniture at all. For peasants, a bed might just be straw on the ground with a blanket. But here, this is the real deal. Wooden slats, woven ropes, feather mattress if you're lucky. Or unlucky, depending on how many geese you had to bribe. You sit down, and the whole thing groans like a judgmental priest. You lie back, and immediately the bed begins its nightly symphony, creaks with every breath, a soft wheeze as the ropes shift beneath you, the faint tap of something, don't think about what, beneath the boards. You're not alone. Medieval beds were rarely private. In wealthy homes, servants might sleep at the foot of the bed, children, if they were small enough, tucked in alongside you. Even dogs, especially the warm ones, were welcome company on cold nights. Beds were rarely about solitude. They were about warmth, safety, sometimes power. You glance up. Above you hangs a canopy, not for elegance, but for function. It keeps in heat, keeps out rats, keeps you from having to look directly into the thatched roof where things move. And oh, the things that move. You scratch your ankle. There's a reason people kept garlic under their pillows or tucked dried herbs into their bed linen. Because lice, fleas, and worse made these beds come alive in the dark. Feather beds were plush, yes, but also perfect breeding grounds for insects. The rich itched just as much as the poor. They just did it more gracefully. Some medieval texts actually warn against bed demons. Spirits believed to enter through the mattress and steal your breath. Others caution against sleeping with your mouth open, for fear a mouse might crawl inside. Yes, that's real, and now it's your problem too. You try not to think about it as you settle in, pulling the heavy blanket to your chin. It's scratchy, thick wool, woven from the coats of sheep that probably judged you in a past life. The fire across the room has burned low, casting flickering shadows on the wall. The shapes shift like dancers, or monsters. Your body is tired, but your mind lingers. Because this bed, it isn't just for sleep. It's for birth, for death, for weddings and illness and whispered secrets. Noblemen took audiences from bed. Women gave birth here. died here, sometimes in the same week. Even legal contracts were signed bedside, the document balanced on a sleeping board. In some cases, the bed itself was inherited, passed down like a title, named in wills. It makes your IKEA frame feel a bit underachieving, doesn't it? Historians still argue about how common beds were. Some say only the wealthy had proper frames. Others believe even modest homes scraped together something padded, even if it was just a sack of chaff. What's certain is that the bed was central, not just physically, but symbolically. It was where your life unfolded, from first breath to last. You roll onto your side. The frame complains again. A breeze creeps in through the shutters. Somewhere, an owl hoots. And despite the creaks, the pests, the ghosts with terrible bedside manners, this might be the best sleep you've had in weeks. Because for once, you're not on the ground, not on the cold stone, not pressed between strangers in a church or a sack of barley. You are wrapped in weight, in wood, in history. And the bed hums its lullaby. Old bones, warm dreams, sleep. The siege is over now, at least for you. You've walked far from the castle walls, past burned-out villages and cold, forgotten fields. You've slept in haystacks and riverbanks, or tried to. But tonight, your luck changes. You found a bed, a real one. You step into the room like you're entering a temple. A four-poster beast of a thing stands in the center, its wooden frame groaning softly under its own age. The mattress is thick, lumpy in odd places, and smells vaguely of lavender, dust, and centuries. You approach cautiously, like it might speak, and in a way it does. This bed has history. Not the kind written down, the kind worn into the linen. Scratches along the frame from where someone carved a heart. A stain on the corner, ink or wine or blood, who knows? A sag in the center where years of bodies curled, dreamt, and died. Beds in the Middle Ages weren't just furniture. They were characters in the story. They were expensive, a symbol of status, the centerpiece of the room. Sometimes the only real furniture at all. For peasants, a bed might just be straw on the ground with a blanket. But here, this is the real deal. Wooden slats, woven ropes, feather mattress if you're lucky. Or unlucky, depending on how many geese you had to bribe. You sit down, and the whole thing groans like a judgmental priest. You lie back. And immediately, the bed begins its nightly symphony, creaks with every breath. A soft wheeze as the ropes shift beneath you, the faint tap of something, don't think about what, beneath the boards. You're not alone. Medieval beds were rarely private. In wealthy homes, servants might sleep at the foot of the bed. Children, if they were small enough, tucked in alongside you. Even dogs, especially the warm ones, were welcome company on cold nights. Beds were rarely about solitude. They were about warmth, safety, sometimes power. You glance up. Above you hangs a canopy, not for elegance, but for function. It keeps in heat, keeps out rats, keeps you from having to look directly into the thatched roof where things move. And oh, the things that move. You scratch your ankle. There's a reason people kept garlic under their pillows or tucked dried herbs into their bed linen. Because lice, fleas, and worse made these beds come alive in the dark. Feather beds were plush, yes, but also perfect breeding grounds for insects. The rich itched just as much as the poor. They just did it more gracefully. Some medieval texts actually warn against bed demons, spirits believed to enter through the mattress and steal your breath. Others caution against sleeping with your mouth open, for fear a mouse might crawl inside. Yes, that's real. Now it's your problem too. You try not to think about it as you settle in, pulling the heavy blanket to your chin. It's scratchy, thick wool, woven from the coats of sheep that probably judged you in a past life. The fire across the room has burned low, casting flickering shadows on the wall. The shapes shift like dancers, or monsters. Your body is tired, but your mind lingers. Because this bed, it isn't just for sleep. It's for birth, for death, for weddings and illness and whispered secrets. Noblemen took audiences from bed. Women gave birth here, died here, sometimes in the same week. Even legal contracts were signed bedside, the document balanced on a sleeping board. In some cases, the bed itself was inherited, passed down like a title, named in wills. It makes your IKEA frame feel a bit underachieving, doesn't it? Historians still argue about how common beds were. Some say only the wealthy had proper frames. Others believe even modest homes scraped together something padded, even if it was just a sack of chaff. What's certain is that the bed was central, not just physically, but symbolically. It was where your life unfolded, from first breath to last. You roll onto your side. The frame complains again. A breeze creeps in through the shutters. Somewhere, an owl hoots. And despite the creaks, the pests, the ghosts with terrible bedside manners, this might be the best sleep you've had in weeks. Because for once, you're not on the ground, not on the cold stone, not pressed between strangers in a church or a sack of barley. You are wrapped in weight, in wood, in history, and the bed hums its lullaby. Old bones, warm dreams, sleep. You wake to darkness, not from fear, not from noise, but from nothing. Just the stillness of early morning, thick and quiet like the breath before a hymn. But your body knows it's time, not to rise, not quite, but to stir, to watch, to wait in the space between sleeps. And tonight, as you lie there, warm under the weight of a blanket and centuries of bedtime tradition, your thoughts drift unexpectedly to monks. Yes, monks, men in robes, men with bells, men who lived by clocks that didn't tick but prayed. Because no one shaped medieval sleep more than they did. Imagine it, a monastery in the hills, cold stone walls wrapped in mist, a garden of withered herbs beneath a moonlit sky, and inside a long, silent dormitory where rows of robed men lie on wooden boards, wrapped in itchy linen. They are not snoring, because any second now the bell will ring. Matins, the night prayer. Somewhere around 2 a.m., the first sleepers will rise, blinking into the candlelight, clutching their cloaks as they shuffle into the chapel barefoot. No complaining, no groaning, just discipline and silence. This is the rule of Saint Benedict, to be exact, a 6th century guide that dictated nearly every moment of a monk's day, including when and how he should sleep. Spoiler, it wasn't much. Benedict allowed for about 6 hours a night, divided, interrupted, spread thin between hours of prayer. For these men, rest was rationed like food, enough to keep them alive, not enough to let them drift too far into comfort. Because comfort was dangerous. You're not a monk, but you try to imagine it. You imagine sleeping fully dressed, on a board, with your head propped on your arm because pillows were considered indulgent. You imagine rising in the cold, walking through dark stone halls lit only by oil lamps, the echoes of your sandals slapping the floor like soft applause, and then standing in the chapel, chanting psalms while your stomach grumbles and your eyelids twitch. They did this every night, and they believed it made them closer to God. But it wasn't just monks. The structure of their nights bled into the world beyond the monastery walls. Villagers often lived in the shadow of church bells, which marked time not in hours, but in obligations. Lauds, vespers, matins, compline. The bells divided the night, just as the day. Some towns even used the nocturne bell to signal curfews or close city gates. If you were out past that, you were suspect, or unlucky, or both. You turn now in your bed, pulling the blanket tighter. Would you have survived that rhythm? Or would you have gone mad with the constant interruptions, the endless discipline? Some did. Historical records mention monks falling asleep during prayers. One abbot even wrote, with deep disappointment, about a brother who snored so loudly as to distract the saints. Relatable. And yet, there's something almost enviable in that order. That certainty. In a world of chaos, plague, famine, endless war, monks lived by a clock no king could stop. They knew what each hour held. They knew what came next. First sleep, prayer. Second sleep, dawn, a sacred routine. And historians still debate. Was the two-sleep pattern influenced by monastic hours? Or did the monks simply adopt a natural rhythm that people already followed? The answer, as usual, is lost in shadows. But here's a thought. Maybe you felt it too. That waking in the middle of the night, not with panic, but with peace. That sense of being gently nudged by something ancient. Something outside of alarm clocks and caffeine schedules. Maybe, in that hour, you were closer to history than you knew. You lie there now, half awake, not rising, not praying, just listening. The fire has died, the wind sighs, the darkness feels kind, and slowly, without rush, your breath evens, your heart slows, your eyes close. No bell rings, no psalm is sung. But somehow, you sleep again. You wake with a start. Not from a bell or a scream or even a bad dream. From the unmistakable feeling of something crawling. You sit up, pat your legs, brush your chest, flick your sleeve, and find nothing, of course. But the tingling lingers, a phantom itch, a medieval rite of passage. Because tonight, my friend, you're sleeping with bugs. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. Welcome to the itchy, twitchy world of bed vermin, where the mattress isn't just where you sleep. It's where things live. You grope for a candle and strike a spark. The dim flame catches on the wall and flickers just enough for you to see your bedding. Straw mattress, linen sheet, wool blanket. The holy trinity of hosting life. And what life it is. Fleas, lice, mites, bed bugs. Not a single one of them invented in the last century. These creatures have been keeping medieval people company since long before the first knight ever forgot to bathe. And forget bathing they did. You scratch again, this time behind the knee. It's not just you. Even royalty scratched. Queen Elizabeth I, yes, a bit post-medieval, but still close enough, was reportedly infested with lice by the time of her death. Monks wrote prayers about staying strong against fleas. Medical manuals gave intricate recipes for flea powder, most of which involved herbs, ash, and animal fat. You sniff your pillow. Is that lavender? Or just very old sweat? There's no Febreze in the 14th century. No hot water taps. No weekly laundry day. Bed linens were rarely washed. Sometimes only once a year, if at all. The straw inside the mattress was often left to rot in place until someone had the energy, money or plague, to deal with it. You try to lie still, but the itch is back. And now you understand why so many medieval people described their sleep as fitful. How could it not be? Some even believed the bugs were divine punishment, or worse, manifestations of sin crawling across the flesh. Imagine the guilt spiral when you're itchy and spiritually doomed. Still, they had tricks. You light a sprig of dried rosemary and wave it like incense around the mattress. It smells like a witch's kitchen, which honestly feels comforting. Some would line their beds with mint, rue, or even crushed garlic. Effective for pests, less so for romance. Others sprinkled sulfur under the sheets, which surely did wonders for both skin and marriage. Then there were the bed curtains. Not for elegance, for containment. Bed curtains kept warmth in and bugs out, or at least they tried. If you were wealthy enough to own a curtained bed, you slept in a sort of cloth cocoon, like a noble moth, hoping not to get eaten by fleas. But even that wasn't foolproof. You toss, flop, twist again. There's a sound beside your bed. A light tap, tap, tap. You hold your breath. Is it a rat? Nope. Worse. It's your little brother, holding his blanket and scratching his elbow. Can I sleep in your bed? You sigh, then lift the covers, and now you remember another reason people shared beds. Body heat, yes. But also the strange comfort of not scratching alone. You both settle in. He curls up like a cat. You share a moment of silence, broken only by mutual itching. You whisper, "Did you check your shirt for lice?" He shrugs. "Probably." Excellent. Still, despite the pests, despite the crawling, despite the very real concern that something is nesting in the straw beneath your hip, there is something deeply human here. Something eternal. Because even now, centuries later, we still battle the night. We still scratch in the dark, shift, toss, blame the mattress, the room, the day. We still try to make peace with the body as it resists its own exhaustion. And for the medieval sleeper, bugs weren't a sign of failure. They were simply part of the experience. Like dreams, or sore backs, or second sleep. You close your eyes. You hear your brother breathing softly beside you. The candle burns low. The itch fades, not because the bugs are gone, but because your body has given up caring. You drift again, half asleep, half scratching. Completely medieval. You wake to the sound of bells. Again. But this time, it isn't the gentle peal of a church calling the faithful or the haunting chime echoing through a monastery. No, this bell clangs with purpose. Urgency. A city bell, and that can only mean one thing. Fire. You sit bolt upright. Your little brother rolls over and groans, still wrapped in your blanket like a sluggish moth. But you're already on your feet, heart racing, feet slapping the wooden floor. Outside, the city is glowing, not with morning light, but with flames. Somewhere, a thatched roof has gone up like tinder, again. And now the fire races along the rooftops like it has somewhere to be. Medieval cities were flammable, like absurdly flammable. Wattle and daub houses packed in tight. Wooden beams and straw insulation. Open hearths and candles and a complete lack of plumbing. Fire didn't just happen. It waited. You run down the narrow stairs, nearly knocking over a chicken someone has brought inside for reasons best not discussed. The street outside is chaos. People shouting, buckets passed hand to hand, the air thick with smoke and ash. And through all this, someone is still sleeping. You blink. Yes. Right there, on the stoop of a butcher's shop, a man lies snoring with one arm flung dramatically across his forehead like a tragic poet. Either he's incredibly drunk, or the embodiment of medieval stress management. You step over him. This is how sleep worked back then. It wasn't sacred. It wasn't always peaceful. It was a thing you took where you could, how you could, even if the world was on fire. But let's step back. Because tonight, it's not just about sleep. It's about night itself, and how different it was in the Middle Ages. You've spent your entire life with the flick of a switch, the hum of a lamp, the glow of a screen. But for most of human history, night was total, unyielding, ink-dark, and dangerous. Without light, everything changed. The world shrank, streets became traps, faces disappeared, sounds became threats. That's why people feared the night, and why sleep, already fragile, was broken into chunks. You're moving now, away from the fire, toward a safer district. The streets twist like a dream or a maze. You pass a man with a lantern, swinging it back and forth like a pendulum. His eyes squint at you. He's the night watch, the closest thing this city has to security. Armed with a stick, a bell, and just enough authority to be annoying. Name and purpose? He asks. Looking for my second sleep, you mutter. He grunts, waves you on. Night watchmen weren't guards in the modern sense. They were there to keep the peace, sure, but mostly to yell at drunkards, stop fights, and occasionally put out fires with a wet cloak and pure optimism. They were also deeply sleepy. In fact, many were infamous for dozing in doorways, leaning against walls, or falling asleep in barrels. There's a famous 13th century joke about a watchman snoring so loud that thieves assumed the town had no guard at all and robbed 3 houses before he woke up. You pass another sleeper now. This one curled beneath a cart, wrapped in a sack, dead to the world. Literally. You're not sure. You prod him gently with your toe. He grunts. Not dead. Just done. Because when the sun went down in a medieval city, most people simply didn't go out. They shut their doors, bolted windows, said their prayers, and waited for morning. But not everyone. There were bakers and blacksmiths who rose before dawn. There were midwives and thieves and drunks who wandered after dark. And there were yous, people caught in the folds of the night between fire and fear, searching for sleep. Historians still argue about how active medieval cities were after sunset. Some claim they shut down entirely. Others point to court records, diaries, and city laws that mention plenty of nocturnal activity. Much of it illegal, erotic, or ecclesiastical. One French ordinance even banned singing lascivious ballads in the street after dark, which raises the obvious question, what is a lascivious ballad, and where can you hear one? You finally find a quieter lane. The fire seems distant now, the air is cooler. You settle against a doorway, your head resting on your folded arms. Not a bed, not even straw, but enough. You close your eyes, and the darkness settles over you. Not the darkness of fear or danger, but the old, thick velvet of the medieval night, the kind that erases clocks, that stretches time. And as you drift into second sleep, at last, you remember this. In the Middle Ages, sleep wasn't just about rest. It was about surviving the night. And tonight, once again, you have. You wake with your cheek pressed against rough stone and your spine asking very politely if you could not do this again. You've slept in a doorway, in a city that smells like boiled cabbage and horse sweat. And yet, for a moment, you feel rested, because that was your second sleep, the one after the waking hour, the one they don't teach you about in school. And this morning, as the sun begins to bloom behind the crooked rooftops, you're heading to a different kind of bed. One you rent by the hour. No, not like that. You're going to a medieval lodging house, half inn, half boarding kennel, half human sardine can. These places were the backbone of medieval urban travel. If you weren't rich enough for a private room at a proper inn, or too poor to sleep in a church, you came here. You duck through a crooked doorway into a building that smells of beer, breath, and sweat. The keeper greets you without looking up. his eyes focused on a ledger that contains, you suspect, at least 3 fake names and 1 sketch of a duck wearing shoes. He gestures toward the back, and you walk into the sleeping room. It's not a room. It's a platform, a single raised wooden board running along the far wall, wide as a wagon and littered with limbs. This is the common bed. You take off your boots. You don't want to, but this seems polite. Find a gap between a woman snoring into a bonnet and a man who smells like onions and regret, and slide in sideways. And this is communal sleeping in its purest form. No privacy, no silence, no blankets unless you brought your own. And if you rolled the wrong way, you were either on the floor or in someone's armpit. But it was cheap. Sometimes just a few pennies for a night. Less if you didn't mind someone sleeping on top of you. Yes, that was a thing. Communal beds weren't just for the poor. Even merchants, pilgrims, and lower-ranking officials often shared. It wasn't considered strange. It was practical, efficient, warm. You close your eyes. Try not to think about lice. A child kicks you in the shin. Someone coughs behind you, wetly. The woman to your left mutters something about goats. You open one eye. There are no goats in the room. You hope. And yet, despite everything, this was normal, expected. There are records of travelers sharing beds and waking up best friends, or mortal enemies. A few even woke up married. Legally. Because here's the thing. In many medieval traditions, sharing a bed could be considered a form of marriage consent. No ceremony, no priest. Just proximity and a warm enough blanket. Some legal scholars still argue about this. Was the bed the contract? Was the act itself binding? Or was it all just social shorthand for we probably shared fleas, might as well share names? Whatever the case, beds weren't private. Not emotionally, not physically, not legally. You shift on the platform, someone gets up, someone lies down, no one says a word, because sleep in a medieval lodging house was fluid. People came and went at odd hours. Travelers arrived at midnight. Bakers rose before dawn. Some would crawl into bed just long enough to get a few hours, then stumble back into the dark. There were even rules. Housekeepers or landlords might dictate who could sleep where. Men on one side, women on the other. No boots in bed, no fighting, no excessive affection. Which is a hilarious way of saying, stop making out next to my turnip sack. You turn over, slowly. Try to drift, but the bed is restless. It creaks with movement, groans with weight. The smell of sour ale and cheese seeps into your nose. Someone begins to snore, loudly, inventively. And yet as your body relaxes, as your thoughts begin to drift, you realize something strange. This isn't so bad. It's loud, yes, but it's also safe. There's comfort in the crowd, in the shared rhythm of breath, in the soft communal murmur of people surviving together. No one here is alone. And for the medieval sleeper, that might have been more valuable than any feather bed or canopy. You dream of blankets that don't smell like onions, of a bed just for you, of a night without interruption. You'll get there, but not tonight. Tonight, you sleep together. Because in this world, solitude is a luxury. But sleep is a team sport. You wake with someone's foot in your face. It's hairy. You blink. The room is still dark, lit only by a single guttering tallow candle stuck in a beer bottle. The foot withdraws, mumbles an apology in a dialect you don't recognize, and rolls away. You sigh. Welcome back to the common bed. You rise slowly, limbs aching, mouth dry. Someone nearby is still whispering in their sleep. Someone else is awake, picking at lice in their beard with a small wooden comb in the determination of a man slaying personal demons. You stretch and decide it's time for fresh air. Outside, the sky is shifting from black to blue. Not sunrise yet, but close. A few peddlers are already setting up in the square, the carts creaking, voices still hoarse with sleep. The world is yawning back to life, and that's when you hear it, an unmistakable sound. Snoring. From a cart. You peer over the edge. It's a pilgrim, wrapped in a patched cloak, clutching a wooden staff carved with saints and symbols. A scallop shell swings gently from his belt. Proof he's returning from Santiago, or at least wants people to think he is. And he's out cold. Mouth open, hat over his eyes, boots still on. You watch him, a little jealous. Because pilgrims knew something others didn't. How to sleep anywhere. Pilgrimage in the Middle Ages wasn't a holiday. It was a grueling, foot-blistering, lice-sharing, soul-shaking journey that could take months, sometimes years. People walked across countries, through mountains, forests, bandit country, and worse, wet socks. And at night, they slept where they could, fields, barns, church steps, roadside shrines, the occasional hospitable peasant hut, if they were lucky, and smelled better than average. You walk past him, into the winding road that leads out of town. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the stars are beginning to fade. And soon, you're not alone. Along the road, in small clusters, other pilgrims shuffle forward. A group of women chant softly, their feet wrapped in cloth. A barefoot monk walks ahead, his walking stick doubling as a snooze pole. You realize he's sleepwalking, and no one questions it. Because pilgrim sleep is a unique category. It's not measured in hours, it's measured in steps. Sleep came in stolen moments, leaning against a wall, under a tree during Mass if the sermon ran long, which it always did. Some pilgrims wrote about dreaming while walking. Others swore they were kept awake by angels or plagued by devilish nightmares under every tree. There are records of people collapsing from exhaustion in the middle of towns and not waking until sundown. And yet, these journeys continued, powered by faith, fear, or sheer spiritual peer pressure. You pass a roadside inn now, its windows dark. Too expensive for most pilgrims. So they sleep in hospices, free rest houses for the devout, often run by monks. Basic but safe. Beds made of straw, bowls of thin broth. Someone watching over you in case you coughed too hard and needed immediate last rites. Hospices were holy rest stops. Places to patch wounds, heal blisters, share prayers, and sleep. And it wasn't just Christians. Across the Islamic world, caravanserais offered similar sanctuaries. Roadside inns for travelers, merchants and pilgrims on the Hajj. Courtyards for animals, communal rooms for sleep. Strong walls to keep out thieves and lions. Yes, lions. Add that to your travel insurance. You stop near a shrine. It's nothing more than a wooden cross set between stones, draped in flowers and bits of ribbon. You sit, rest your head, close your eyes, and in that moment you feel it, something pilgrims knew deep in their bones. Sleep isn't just survival, it's part of the journey, because each rest brings you closer, each nap a pause in the rhythm of movement, each dream a whisper of the divine. Historians still debate how spiritual these experiences really were. Were pilgrims transformed, or just tired and mildly concussed? Maybe both, but there's no denying it. Sleep on the road shaped them, made them softer, stronger, stranger. You lie back on the grass. The sky brightens, birds stir. Somewhere a bell tolls from a village church. Someone singing, and as your eyes close again, You think, maybe you don't need a bed. Maybe, just for now, the world is soft enough and the road will wait. You wake with someone's foot in your face. It's hairy. You blink. The room is still dark, lit only by a single guttering tallow candle stuck in a beer bottle. The foot withdraws, mumbles an apology in a dialect you don't recognize, and rolls away. You sigh. Welcome back to the common bed. You rise slowly, limbs aching, mouth dry. Someone nearby is still whispering in their sleep. Someone else is awake, picking at lice in their beard with a small wooden comb and the determination of a man slaying personal demons. You stretch and decide it's time for fresh air. Outside, the sky is shifting from black to blue. Not sunrise yet, but close. A few peddlers are already setting up in the square, their carts creaking, voices still hoarse with sleep. The world is yawning back to life. And that's when you hear it. An unmistakable sound. Snoring. From a cart. You peer over the edge. It's a pilgrim, wrapped in a patched cloak, clutching a wooden staff carved with saints and symbols. A scallop shell swings gently from his belt. Proof he's returning from Santiago, or at least wants people to think he is. And he's out cold. Mouth open, hat over his eyes. Boots still on. You watch him, a little jealous, because pilgrims knew something others didn't. How to sleep anywhere. Pilgrimage in the Middle Ages wasn't a holiday. It was a grueling, foot-blistering, lice-sharing, soul-shaking journey that could take months, sometimes years. People walked across countries, through mountains, forests, bandit country, and worse, wet socks. And at night, they slept where they could. Fields, barns, church steps, roadside shrines, the occasional hospitable peasant hut, if they were lucky and smelled better than average. You walk past him into the winding road that leads out of town. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the stars are beginning to fade. And soon, you're not alone. Along the road in small clusters, other pilgrims shuffle forward. A group of women chant softly, their feet wrapped in cloth. A barefoot monk walks ahead, his walking stick doubling as a snooze pole. You realize he's sleepwalking, and no one questions it. Because pilgrim sleep is a unique category. It's not measured in hours, it's measured in steps. Sleep came in stolen moments, leaning against a wall, under a tree, during Mass if the sermon ran long, which it always did. Some pilgrims wrote about dreaming while walking. Others swore they were kept awake by angels or plagued by devilish nightmares under every tree. There are records of people collapsing from exhaustion in the middle of towns and not waking until sundown. And yet, these journeys continued, powered by faith, fear, or sheer spiritual peer pressure. You pass a roadside inn now, its windows dark, too expensive for most pilgrims. So they sleep in hospices, free rest houses for the devout, often run by monks, basic but safe. Beds made of straw, bowls of thin broth. Someone watching over you in case you coughed too hard and needed immediate last rites. Hospices were holy rest stops, places to patch wounds, heal blisters, share prayers, and sleep. And it wasn't just Christians. Across the Islamic world, caravanserais offered similar sanctuaries. Roadside inns for travelers, merchants, and pilgrims on the Hajj. Courtyards for animals, communal rooms for sleep, strong walls to keep out thieves and lions. Yes, lions. Add that to your travel insurance. You stop near a shrine. It's nothing more than a wooden cross set between stones, draped in flowers and bits of ribbon. You sit, rest your head, close your eyes, and in that moment, you feel it. Something pilgrims knew deep in their bones. Sleep isn't just survival. It's part of the journey. Because each rest brings you closer. Each nap, a pause in the rhythm of movement. Each dream, a whisper of the divine. Historians still debate how spiritual these experiences really were. Were pilgrims transformed? Or just tired and mildly concussed? Maybe both. But there's no denying it. Sleep on the road shaped them, made them softer, stronger, stranger. You lie back on the grass. The sky brightens. Birds stir. Somewhere, a bell tolls from a village church. Someone's singing. And as your eyes close again, you think, maybe you don't need a bed. Maybe, just for now, the world is soft enough, and the road will wait. You wake to sunlight on your face and dew in your ears. A terrible combination. The grass is wet, your cloak is damp, and your back feels like it's been stepped on by a particularly large goose. You sit up slowly, blinking at the road ahead. Pilgrims have already passed you. Some left footprints, others prayers. You stretch, yawn, scratch a bite, and then you smell it. Smoke, not fire smoke, not city smoke, hearth smoke. You follow it, stomach rumbling past a cluster of cottages with thatched roofs and chickens with zero respect for personal space. A woman is pulling bread from a clay oven. A boy is feeding goats by flinging hay at them with a look of mild betrayal. And then you see him, an old man asleep under a tree, completely still, except for one hand, which occasionally flinches, like he's trying to swat at a dream. You watch him, because today we're talking about sleep and age, and what it meant to sleep not as a child, or a monk, or a pilgrim, but as an old soul in the medieval world. Spoiler, it was harder than it looked. Old age in the Middle Ages was complicated. If you were over 40, you were elderly by many standards. Over 60, practically a saint. People didn't necessarily die young, but surviving illness, war, childbirth, and random acts of plague was no small feat. So when people aged, their sleep aged with them. Many medieval texts describe fragmented sleep in the elderly, waking often, rising before dawn, napping during the day. Modern researchers believe this pattern actually aligns with changes in brain chemistry as we grow older. But back then, it was seen as spiritual, a gift. The old were thought to be closer to God because they saw more of the night. Aging monks were allowed to pray instead of sleep. Elders who woke frequently were encouraged to reflect, meditate, or recite psalms in the dark, because clearly, if God keeps waking you up, he wants to talk. You step quietly past the sleeping man. His breath is steady. His dreams are probably slow and ancient. Inside one cottage, an older woman sits at the hearth, wrapped in wool, eyes closed. But she's not asleep. Not quite. She's resting, the other kind of sleep. In the Middle Ages, rest had meaning. It was often seen as preparation for prayer, for death, for the afterlife. People believed that the way you rested said something about your soul. The elderly were expected to rest gracefully, with humility, silence, and wisdom. No snoring, no flailing, just gentle decline. You remember reading once, or maybe dreaming, that some medieval manuals instructed the old to sleep as if already in the tomb, quiet, cold, and still. Cheerful, right? But not everyone followed that advice. Some elders were notoriously bad sleepers. They wandered at night, mumbled stories, shuffled through gardens, muttering about omens. In many villages, it was an unspoken rule. If you saw an old man walking in the mist before sunrise, you didn't speak to him. He might be wise or cursed. Historians debate whether this was actual sleepwalking, dementia, or simply folklore doing what folklore does, turning human behavior into ghost stories. You sit by the fire now. The woman opens one eye, offers you a mug of something warm and questionable. You take it. It tastes like herbs, bark and dirt. She smiles. Good for the nerves, she says. Herbs were the medieval answer to everything, including sleep. Elderflower, chamomile, valerian root, some stewed, some smoked, some worn in pouches tied to the wrist or tucked under pillows. And while the elderly might use herbs to sleep, they also used them to dream. Dreams were important, especially for the old. Visions, warnings, messages from the dead. It was believed the elderly were more likely to dream true, to receive omens in sleep, to pass wisdom through nightmares, to see what others couldn't. You glance at the old man under the tree again. He's still asleep. Mouth open, one sock off. Maybe he's dreaming of his youth, or of a better pair of shoes. Either way, he's earned it. Because in the Middle Ages, old age wasn't peaceful. It was often poor, painful, and cold. But the sleep that came with it, that was sacred. You finish your drink, thank the woman. Step back onto the road. The sun is rising now, the mist is lifting, and somewhere, in a dozen cottages and corners, old souls are resting, between this world and the next. Eyes closed. Listening. You're walking now, feet aching, eyes grainy, mind just a little fogged over from too much road and too little rest. The village fades behind you, replaced by fields full of morning light and something vaguely farm-like in the air. And then you hear it, bells. But not church bells this time, not town bells or fire alarms or some poor night watchman clanging for help. These are animal bells. Goat, sheep, cow. You crest a small hill and spot it, a tiny medieval farmstead, all patchy thatch and crooked fences. A woman wrangles chickens with a stick. A man leans over a pigsty with the expression of someone reconsidering every choice that led to this moment, and stretched across a patch of shade near the barn, on a pile of hay, snoring gently into the wind. A farmer. He's got straw in his beard, a hat over his eyes, boots still on, one hand resting on a loyal, if slightly flea-infested dog. You've just walked into the medieval nap zone. Because today, we're talking about something that's often forgotten when people imagine life in the Middle Ages. Daytime sleep. Not just laziness, not just recovery. Strategic napping. The sun beats down and you take a seat beside the barn, resting your back against the warm wall. The air smells of hay, manure, and sour milk, but in a comforting, home-brewed kind of way. You close your eyes for just a second, and then remember, you're not allowed to drift off just yet. Because there's something important to understand here. Medieval peasants didn't get 8-hour nights in memory foam luxury. They got short, segmented rest, divided by chores, animals, hunger, and the occasional outbreak of moral panic. So they took sleep in pieces, a few hours after sunset, a few more before sunrise, and if they were lucky, a nap in the afternoon, especially during summer when the heat made work unbearable. There's even a word for it in some medieval texts. Sesta, from Latin sexta hora, or the 6th hour after dawn. It gave birth to our word siesta. Monks did it, farmers did it, even kings, when they weren't hunting or murdering their cousins, did it. You open your eyes just enough to watch the farmer roll over and snuggle deeper into the hay like a medieval cinnamon roll. The animals don't mind. Chickens peck around him. A sheep blates once, then lies down beside him and joins the nap like it's a union requirement. This was community sleep. Sleep not in isolation, but in rhythm with the world. Historians still debate how organized these naps were. Some think they were deliberate, scheduled into the agricultural day. Others argue they were simply collapses of fatigue, made romantic in hindsight. But one thing's clear. Sleep wasn't all at night. It crept into the cracks of the day, especially for women. Inside the farmhouse, a woman kneads dough with one hand and rubs her temple with the other. A baby cries. A toddler shouts something about a goat. And when you peek in again 10 minutes later, she's sitting in a chair, eyes closed, head tilted, dough rising quietly in the bowl beside her. Not asleep, but not awake either. This half-sleep was common. People dozed, sitting up, resting their eyes, drifting between states while the fire burned down or the pot boiled. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't restful, but it was enough. And in a world without clocks, sometimes sleep came down to this. If your body says stop, you stop. You lie back on the grass now. The dog from earlier ambles over, gives your face a curious sniff, and flops down beside you with a grunt. You're honored. The farmer shifts again, mumbles something about turnips. Starts snoring. It's not the cleanest nap, or the quietest, but it's real. Because in the Middle Ages, sleep wasn't sacred. It was necessary, and if that meant stealing an hour under a tree in a barn or beside a half-finished loaf of bread, so be it. The sun rises higher. The breeze softens. You close your eyes, not to escape, but to join the rhythm. Not of time, but of rest. You wake to the sound of hooves. Not fast, urgent galloping, but the slow, steady clop-clop of a cart trundling over uneven ground. You sit up, straw stuck to your cheek, the loyal dog from earlier now using your leg as a personal pillow. A merchant's cart rolls past the farmstead, stacked with barrels and sacks and what may or may not be a severed pig's head. The driver hums a tune that sounds vaguely like a funeral dirge, but with flair. You stand, stretch, and follow. Because today, you're going on the road again, not as a pilgrim, not as a farmer, but as a traveler in a world where sleep is always temporary, always borrowed, and always negotiable. The road winds through hills, under sparse trees, past crumbling ruins and curious goats. By mid-morning, the sun is warm, your feet are sore, and the merchant you're walking behind has told you the same joke 3 times. You laugh politely each time. Eventually, you arrive at a wayside tavern. Not quite an inn, not quite a stable, something in between. A thatched roof rectangle with one room for eating, another for drinking, and a space in the back that might qualify as a bedroom if you're willing to be generous and lower your hygiene expectations. The tavern keeper eyes you as you step in. You nod. He nods. This is a legally binding contract now. You pay your coin, one for food, one for a space by the fire, and one for not asking questions. And then you lie down on a fur mat beside the hearth. It's already crowded. A bard snoozes with his lute cradled like a child. A soldier leans against the wall, eyes closed, one hand still on his sword hilt. A woman sleeps upright in a chair with her mouth open in a way that says, "If you wake me, I will bite you." And you? You're just grateful to have heat. Because travel in the Middle Ages was brutal. And sleep, even more so. You couldn't count on a bed, or a floor, or even a roof. Most people walked. Few had horses. Even fewer had the money for real inns. So they begged shelter, snuck into barns, or curled up beside roads and hoped the wolves were busy elsewhere. Some cities had travelers' halls or pilgrims' hospices, but they were often full or only for certain approved guests. Others slept in churches, on benches, in cloisters, curled under altar tables. Sacred ground was considered safe, if not comfortable. And then, of course, there were the inns. Ah, yes. The medieval inn, part hotel, part tavern, part crime scene. If you were lucky, you got a bed. If you were very lucky, it didn't have someone else already in it. Because inns operated on the hotbed system. You didn't rent a room, you rented a bed space for a limited time. Sometimes just a few hours. Sometimes you shared with strangers. Sometimes you didn't get a bed at all, just a bench or straw in a corner. One famous record from the 14th century London describes an inn that packed 8 people into a single bed. They were not pleased. You close your eyes now, beside the fire. Let the warmth crawl across your skin. Let the hum of conversation and clatter of mugs become a lullaby, just as you're drifting. Thwack, you jolt awake. The tavern keeper is beating the doorframe with a broom. "Wake rotation," he shouts, because space is limited. Sleep is rationed. You've had your hour. Time to move. You grumble, gather your things, and shuffle outside into the fading light. Your eyes sting. Your bones protest. And still, you keep walking. Because in the medieval world, sleep wasn't guaranteed. It was a privilege, a negotiation, a moving target, and no one knew this better than travelers. Those caught between places, always chasing the next fire, the next meal, the next bit of dry ground. You find a tree beside the road, not ideal, but dry. You sit, lean, exhale, and dream of a place that doesn't move, a bed that doesn't snore, a roof without holes. But even as you drift off, you know the truth. You're part of a long, unbroken line of sleepers on the road. Feet sore, eyes heavy, dreams wrapped in dust, and the road always waiting. You wake with a leaf stuck to your face and something much less pleasant stuck to your sock. A slug. You flick it off with the quiet panic of someone trying to preserve dignity while also shrieking internally. The slug is unimpressed. It slithers off with the sluggish arrogance of a creature that knows you've just spent the night in its bed. You stand up, groggy, damp, and slightly humiliated. But don't worry, you're not alone. Because tonight, we're entering one of the least glamorous yet most essential chapters of medieval sleep. Sleeping outdoors. Whether it was by necessity, tradition, or sheer misfortune, sleeping under the stars wasn't just the domain of travelers and pilgrims. It was part of life. For soldiers, shepherds, beggars, rebels, and yes, sometimes nobles too. The road before you winds into the forest now, cooler here, shaded by thick trees that turn morning light into soft green gold. You hear bird song. You smell moss, pine, and something like old leather. And then, voices. You crouch behind a tree, peer through the branches. There's a group of outlaws around a fire, not the romantic Robin Hood kind. The muddy, half-starved, possibly armed kind. They're wrapped in cloaks and rags, passing around a hunk of bread and watching it like it might sprout legs and run. One of them is asleep already, mouth open, snoring against a log. Welcome to the outlaw nap. These were people who lived permanently between safety and survival, banished from towns, avoiding sheriffs, sleeping in the woods not by choice, but because they had nowhere else to go. And their sleep was as broken as their luck. Always listening, always half awake, always ready to bolt. You keep walking. Farther in, the woods open into a meadow, and you find something strange. A young shepherd curled up beside his flock, fast asleep, staff still in hand. The sheep look bored but unbothered. Shepherds had to sleep outside often, watching over their animals against wolves. thieves, and the occasional cow with abandonment issues. They developed a kind of semi-sleep, eyes closed, ears open, senses tuned to the rhythm of bleats and rustling leaves. This wasn't a restful sleep. It was functional sleep, the kind you take in fragments whenever the world lets you. And still, people made it work. They built bivouacs, quick lean-tos of branches and cloth, dug shallow trenches to keep dry, slept under overturned carts, used their cloaks as blankets and their boots as pillows. One particularly clever knight once wrote about using a roasted goose as both dinner and foot warmer. We do not recommend that. You sit down under a tree and take off your boots. Your feet are damp, your socks questionable, and your soul just a little frayed. But the air is fresh. The world is still. And you realize something. Out here, there's no clock. You sleep when you're tired. You wake when you're not. And the sun becomes your alarm. Soft, natural, non-negotiable. Historians argue whether outdoor sleep was common or just poorly documented. Some say it was rare, dangerous, discouraged. Others point to ballads, court records, even religious texts that describe people sleeping under stars, beside rivers, between roots. There's even a medieval poem that describes the blessing of grass upon your cheek, which is poetic and itchy. You lie back now, cloak pulled around you, head resting on a bundle of laundry that may or may not be clean. The forest hums. A breeze dances through the leaves. You hear insects, birds, distant hoofbeats. And somehow, it feels safe. Not because you are safe, but because sleep, even here, is a kind of defiance. A whisper to the world that you will rest, even if everything else says no. You close your eyes. The tree creaks overhead. A squirrel drops something on your knee and chitters rudely. You don't move, because you've joined a quiet tradition stretching back centuries. Those who sleep beneath the open sky, wrapped in nothing but shadows and stubbornness. Half prayer, half protest, all peace. You wake to rain. Not a storm, just a steady, whispering drizzle, the kind that soaks your clothes, dampens your mood, and makes everything smell like wet wool and moss. You sit up slowly, peeling your cloak off your face. It's soggy. Your boots are heavier. There's a slug in your lap again. You suspect it's the same slug. He stares at you. You stare back. A silent understanding is reached. Neither of you slept well. Welcome to medieval weather, the eternal enemy of sleep. Because tonight, you're going to learn what it meant to try to rest when the world itself refused to cooperate. When roofs leaked, wind howled, and the cold crept into your bones like guilt after a bad confession. You stand and make your way toward shelter, a ruined stone chapel nearby, half swallowed by ivy and silence. Inside, the roof is mostly intact, the walls thick with damp, the altar long abandoned. A bird nests in the corner. You don't blame it. You curl up on a stone bench near the wall. It's hard, cold, uneven, perfect, because this is more shelter than most people had when the weather turned. In the Middle Ages, bad weather could ruin everything. Food, work, health, and, yes, sleep. Houses weren't airtight. Most had gaps in the thatch, cracks in the walls, and floors that turned into soup after 2 days of rain. People stuffed moss between beams, hung furs across doorways, and hoped the mold wouldn't bloom too aggressively. And when storms came, you didn't sleep, you braced. Imagine lying in bed, listening to the wind howl like a choir of angry banshees. Rain dripping onto your face. The fire sputtering, the dog whimpering, your neighbor's roof flying off. Again. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was terrifying. Some believed storms were omens. signs of sin, divine wrath, or witches stirring the heavens. One 12th century monk described thunder as the voice of God shouting at humanity to repent, which sounds poetic until your bed floats across the room. You adjust your cloak. The stone is cold beneath you, not just chilly cold, medieval cold, which is to say, unforgiving. There was no central heating, no electric blankets, just fires, if you had wood. And if you didn't, you layered, you burrowed, you endured. The wealthy sometimes had bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals, slid between sheets before bed. Lovely in theory, a fire hazard in practice. One noble woman famously burnt her eyebrows off when hers tipped over mid-slumber. Poorer folk, they used stones heated in the hearth, or just each other, which brings us to the bundle sleep. Families, friends, strangers, all piled into one bed like medieval nesting dolls. Not because they loved each other, but because body heat was currency. You might be wedged between your uncle and a sheep, but at least you weren't freezing to death. There's a reason so many songs, prayers, and poems from this period mention cold nights. It was a constant, a shadow, a thief of sleep, and it didn't matter where you were. A noble's castle could be draftier than a stable. Monks huddled in stone cells with only a woolen habit and a candle. Peasants slept in damp corners, curled like animals. Even kings, complained about the cold in their letters. One French king once refused to sleep for 2 nights because his room smelled too much like winter. A bold complaint from someone who owned 3 baths. You lie back, watching the candle flicker against the chapel's ruined walls. Water drips from the ceiling. You shift to avoid it. And you think, how did they do it? How did they sleep like this? And the answer is, they didn't always. Sometimes they waited, through storms, through cold, through fear, wrapped in damp blankets and darker thoughts. But when the weather passed, when the wind died and the fire crackled again, they slept the way only survivors can. Deep, grateful, unapologetic, you close your eyes. The stone is still hard, the rain still falls, but your body, used to this rhythm now, doesn't fight it. You exhale, and dream of warmth not yet found, but coming, always coming. You wake not to sound or light, but to stillness, not silence, stillness. A thick, heavy quiet that presses against your chest like wool soaked in time. The rain has stopped. The air holds its breath, and somewhere, far beyond the chapel walls, something stirs. You sit up slowly, the stone bench creaking beneath you. Your breath forms a pale mist. It's just before dawn. And in this strange gray hour, between dreams and day, you are somewhere else. Tonight we're stepping into the most mysterious and maybe the most sacred corner of medieval sleep. Dreams. Not just the random night movies about falling teeth and flying sheep. Number dreams in the Middle Ages weren't quirks of brain chemistry. They were messages, warnings, visions. You walk through the chapel's crumbling doorway, into a field washed in fog. The grass glitters with frost. A raven caws once as if to remind you you're still here. But are you? Because for medieval people, dreams weren't separate from reality. They were part of it. A bridge. And when you dreamed, you didn't just rest. You traveled. You walk now slowly, past an old woman crouched beside a stream. Her eyes are closed. She murmurs something to the water. Then she drinks from her cupped hands and lies back in the mud, smiling. She's dreaming while awake, or praying. In the Middle Ages, it was sometimes hard to tell. Monks recorded dreams in long, vivid detail, whole books filled with nighttime visions of angels, devils, and strangely judgmental talking animals. One Benedictine brother claimed he dreamed of a staircase covered in cheese, which led him to paradise. Another dreamed of the Virgin Mary scolding him for snoring during Vespers. It wasn't just monks. Peasants dreamed too, and took it seriously. If you dreamed of a white dog, you were blessed. If you dreamed of a spinning wheel, someone would die. If you dreamed of your teeth falling out, same thing. Medieval dreams really had it out for your teeth. But dreams weren't just omens. They were acts of memory. In a world where stories were passed by mouth, not screen, dreams became part of folklore. You didn't just have a dream, you shared it. At breakfast, in church, by the fire. Some dreams spread across entire villages, shaping decisions, marriages, even battles. You reach a clearing now, where 3 figures sleep beside a low fire. A child, a man, a woman, all different clothes, all different lives, all breathing together. You wonder, what are they dreaming, and what are you? Because this moment, this grey, waking dream hour, has been described by scholars, monks, and poets alike. The time when the veil thins, when the body still clings to sleep, and the mind wanders. Some called it the angel hour, others feared it, because in this half-dream state, you're not quite in control. You might hear voices, see faces, feel weight on your chest. Today, we call this sleep paralysis. Back then, it was demons, ghosts, witches, or worse, your dead grandmother scolding you for that thing you did last week. One 13th century physician wrote of patients who woke each morning with bruises from dreams they could not remember. Another described a woman who claimed she was visited nightly by a talking owl that gave her legal advice. The owl, for the record, was very pro-feudalism. Dreams were treated seriously. Entire dream books were published, manuals for interpreting what your brain was trying to tell you. Some priests learned to read dreams like scripture. Kings consulted dream readers before war. And yes, dreams affected sleep itself. People feared dreams, prayed for better ones, refused to sleep in certain beds or under certain moons or on full stomachs because they believed it would invite bad dreams, the kind that stick to your ribs and whisper for weeks. You lie down in the grass now. The sun is still not up. And as your eyes close once more, you feel the weight of 1,000 other sleepers around you, across time, across history. Dreaming, each one building a map of the world from symbols and shadows. You dream of a city where no one ever wakes, of a cathedral made of bread, of someone calling your name from behind a door that doesn't exist. And you sleep, not to escape, but to explore. Because in the Middle Ages, sleep wasn't just rest, it was a portal. And tonight you've walked through. You wake somewhere else. Not the chapel, not the forest, not the road. This place smells like lavender and candle wax, and the sheets, yes, sheets, are warm, clean, and surprisingly embroidered. You sit up, startled. There are no chickens in the corner, no outlaws, no damp cloaks or snoring strangers. You are somehow in a monastery, specifically in a guest cell, one of the small stone rooms reserved for visitors or pilgrims lucky enough to be given a bed by the monks. The candle by your cot has burned low. A small wooden crucifix hangs above the door. Outside, bells begin to toll. Not the hour, the vigils. Because tonight we're walking through a very different kind of sleep. Not one interrupted by slugs or snow, but one that is deliberately broken. It's monastic sleep. You swing your legs off the bed. The stone floor is cold. The robes folded beside you are simple, scratchy, humble. You dress and step out into the corridor, where a few sleepy figures are already moving toward the chapel. No one speaks, because in the Middle Ages, monks didn't sleep like other people. They slept in pieces. The day was divided into 8 parts. The divine office, a rhythm of prayers and chants meant to keep the soul focused and the body humble. And that rhythm, it did not care if you were tired. You slept in short bursts, maybe 2 or 3 hours at a time, then up again for prayer. Back to bed, rise before dawn, pray, sleep if allowed, work, pray, sleep again. It wasn't a nap, it was discipline. Inside the chapel, rows of monks stand in silence. And then the chanting begins, low, steady, ancient. It echoes off the stone like breath turned into music. You sit at the back, watching them, their eyes half-lidded, their hands folded, their bodies swaying just slightly with the rhythm. Some are clearly still half asleep. One sneezes and mutters a Latin apology. But all of them are here. Because sleep, to a monk, was not the end of the day. It was intermission. They weren't trying to be well rested. They were trying to be ready for death, for God, for temptation. The less comfort, the better. One monk famously wrote, "Sleep is a thief of prayer. Let it come only in surrender, never in indulgence." And yet monks slept, not just in beds, not just in cells. They slept in cloisters, on benches, during long readings, heads bowed over scripture like wilting flowers. There are records of monks sleepwalking into gardens, murmuring psalms. One abbot reportedly snored so loudly during matins that he was assigned to chant alone in a side chapel. But for all the structure, there was compassion too. Some orders allowed older monks more rest. Novices could take midday naps. Illness brought permission for extra sleep. Even the monastic rule of St. Benedict, stern as it was, reminded abbots not to burden the weak. You glance down the row. A young monk dozes with his eyes open. An impressive trick. A brother beside him gently nudges his elbow. No scolding, just a shared smile, barely visible in the candlelight. You lean back against the wall, lulled by the rhythm of chant and flame. And then, before you even realize it, you drift, not deeply, not recklessly, but with purpose. You are sleeping within the structure of something ancient, something intentional. And for the first time in days, your body and the world are in sync, because this is sleep as devotion. Not rest from labor, but rest within labor. The prayer continues. A voice cracks, someone coughs. A bell rings, soft and silver, and when the chanting ends, the monks file out wordlessly. You follow, back to your cell. Curl beneath the blanket, close your eyes, and sleep again. Not because you've earned it, but because it is time. You wake before the bell. The sky outside your small monastic cell is still velvet dark, though a thread of silver clings to the eastern edge of the window. The candle by your bed has burned down to a wax puddle. Your body aches, but not with fatigue, with stillness. You've become used to motion, restless sleep, shifting places, moving bodies. But here the quiet pressed into your bones like prayer etched into stone. And yet, you don't linger. Because outside this sacred silence lies another world, a louder one, a more luxurious one. You pull on your worn shoes, slip out of the cell, and leave the monastery behind. Today, you're going to sleep like a lord. Not in a castle, not yet. First, in a manor house, the seat of the minor nobility. Because while kings had gold-threaded pillows and trapdoor panic rooms, it was the manorial lords and ladies who formed the majority of the medieval elite. In their sleep, it was different. By midday, you arrive at the manor, half fortress, half farmhouse, with ivy climbing its stone walls and guards yawning at the gate. A servant lets you in with a grunt. You're clearly not impressive enough to bother asking questions. Inside, it's dim and smoky. Tapestries hang from the walls, more to block drafts than to show off wealth. A dog snoozes in the corner. Someone's trying and failing to tune a lute. And in the great chamber upstairs, under a painted ceiling of saints and poorly drawn lions, a lady sleeps. Not alone, but not with her husband either. No, she's surrounded by servants. One on a mat by the door, another curled near the foot of her bed. Her maid asleep in a chair, knitting still clutched in her hand. Because medieval lords and ladies rarely slept alone, for safety, for warmth, for gossip control. Even the wealthy shared beds, though theirs were larger, draped in heavy curtains and filled with geese feather mattresses instead of straw. You're invited, barely, to rest in the corner of the room. You do. And for a moment, you experience what elite sleep truly meant. Privacy when desired, but rarely complete solitude. Luxury layered with noise. There's a fireplace crackling, footsteps on the stairs, a baby crying somewhere, muffled by distance and stone. And over it all, the smell, lavender, beeswax, and something roasted. Because the rich, they didn't just sleep, they prepared for sleep. Perfumed sheets, herbal pillows, wool blankets thick enough to smother regret. Some even hired bed attendants, young women who would warm the bed before their lords arrived. Yes, this was awkward for everyone. And if they couldn't sleep, they had remedies, spiced wine, warm milk, syrups made from poppies, lettuce, vinegar, and sometimes ground-up pearls. Not recommended. One nobleman swore by sleeping with a live hedgehog under his bed to draw away bad humors. Another had a musician play the same tune every night until his wife threatened divorce if she heard one more lute solo in D minor. But elite sleep came with its own curse. Interruption, visitors, political intrigue, sudden messengers bringing urgent news about sheep rebellions or cousinly betrayals. One 15th century lord wrote in his diary that he was woken 4 times in a single night. By the wind, by his wife, by the steward announcing a man with a goose, and finally, by the goose. You drift off now, wrapped in borrowed wool and distant laughter. A servant coughs in the hallway. The lute player hits the wrong note again, and you realize even the rich didn't always sleep well, because wealth could buy comfort, but not peace, not from dreams, not from worry, not from the weight of too many titles, and not enough trust. You open your eyes. The lady is still asleep, her hand curled under her chin like a child. Outside the manor stirs, servants rise, doors creak, another day begins. And you roll over, close your eyes again. Because today, you're a guest, and for once, just once, you get to sleep in. You wake in linen, real linen. Not sackcloth, not wool, not a pile of cloaks repurposed from dead travelers. The fabric is soft, warm from your body, and smells faintly of rosemary. Because of course it does. You're still in the manor, in the borrowed corner of someone else's privilege. And today, that privilege gets an upgrade. Because this morning you're traveling farther uphill, past the manor house, through guarded gates, across drawbridges slick with dew, into the stone belly of power itself. The castle. Today, you'll sleep like a king, or at least beside one, or at least on the floor outside the royal chamber, hoping no one notices. You follow the early trade path, winding toward the castle's outer wall. The guards barely glance at you. Too early, Too cold, too tired to care. They point you inside, and suddenly you're in the inner sanctum of medieval elite sleep. You expect splendor. Instead, you find stone. Cold, damp, echoing stone. The castle is grand, yes, but it's not cozy. The air smells like smoke, iron, and wet dog. Someone's dropped a roasted leg of something in the hallway. You step over it, trying not to make eye contact. Eventually, you find the solar, the private family room in the upper floor, where nobles would sometimes sleep instead of the main chamber, especially in winter. It's warmer here, with tapestries on the walls and a fire flickering beneath an iron pot of something thick and possibly edible. And in the center of the room, a great bed. Not just big, monumental, curtained, canopied, carved. Blankets stacked like political alliances. Pillows stuffed with swan feathers. A fur throw that might be wolf or might just be very angry sheep. This is no peasant sleep. This is symbolic sleep. Because to sleep as a noble wasn't just to rest. It was to declare, look how soft I am. Look how guarded. Look at how many people are awake at this very moment, making sure I don't have to be. You're given a spot near the hearth. You curl up, listen to the crackling fire and the soft rustle of tapestries swaying in the wind. And you imagine the king, or perhaps just his steward, tucked behind all those curtains. Snoring, drooling on a pillow probably worth more than your childhood village. But kings didn't always sleep well either, because royal sleep was dangerous. Enemies outside, poison inside, assassins, plots, ambitious cousins with a talent for stabbing. Many monarchs slept with guards posted at their doors, daggers under their pillows, and eyes that never quite closed all the way. One medieval king had 3 bodyguards, whose only task was to wake him if they smelled smoke. Another built a private staircase out of his chamber so he could escape if necessary. Spoiler, it wasn't always enough. There's a story, half legend, half fact, about a king who insisted on a rotating bed. Not for comfort, for paranoia. He believed it would confuse attackers. It mostly confused the carpenters. And then there's the question of who slept in the royal bed. Spouses, yes, but also ministers, servants, royal favorites. The occasional foreign guest. It wasn't always romantic. It was political. Bed-sharing signaled trust, power, connection. There's a record of a 14th century queen who invited a visiting princess to share her bed, purely to show alliance. The chronicler noted they slept with little talk and no incident. Medieval gossip, ladies and gentlemen. You shift closer to the fire. A servant stirs nearby, stoking the embers. Somewhere above, a dog barks, a baby cries. The castle, for all its wealth, never truly sleeps. Too many people, too many secrets, too many echoes. But still, there's something luxurious in this moment. You're warm, safe-ish, surrounded by walls that once kept out armies. And the dreams, they come slow, deep, like wine that's finally hit the bloodstream. Because even here, in the stone heart of power, sleep is still a surrender. A king closes his eyes, a servant lies quietly by the fire, and you, just a traveler, fade into the hush that blankets even the most gilded of cages. You wake to muffled voices, not sharp or urgent, but hushed, like whispers in a library, or secrets shared too early in the morning. The fire near your feet is just embers now, pulsing red and gold. Someone tiptoes across the solar, carrying a chamber pot with the grave care of someone who's seen things. You rub your eyes and sit up. Because today, you're going someplace different. Not a bed, not a barn, not even a castle. Today, you're entering the medieval sick room, where sleep was not rest, but medicine. A servant waves you toward a smaller chamber off the main hall. The door creaks. Inside, the air smells of vinegar, lavender, and something faintly boiled. And in the narrow bed before you lies a man, pale, sweating, muttering. You've met illness before on this journey. You've seen coughs, fevers, rashes, but here, in this room, illness takes up space like a second presence. Heavy, still, watching. Tonight's story isn't just about sleep, it's about fever sleep. The kind that doesn't heal, the kind that blurs days into dreams, the kind people prayed through. In the Middle Ages, illness was everywhere. Contagion, infection, famine, childbirth, toothache, all could bring you to the edge of death. And what did you do when it came? You slept, not because you wanted to, but because there was nothing else to do. Physicians, those lucky few who read Arabic texts and owned expensive robes, believed that sleep could balance your humors. That rest, especially during the right phase of the moon, might allow the body to purge its excess bile, phlegm, blood, or melancholy. Sometimes they induced sleep with herbs, valerian, poppy syrup, mandrake, if you were bold and didn't mind hallucinating conversations with your ancestors. Hospitals, such as they were run mostly by monks and nuns. Clean linen, brother prayer, and sleep. Rows of beds, each with a crucifix above it. No machines, no charts. Just the rhythm of breathing, whispered psalms, and the occasional scream when someone's wound was cleaned with wine and a firm slap. You watch the man stir in his sleep. He moans, his hands twist in the blankets. He's dreaming, or remembering, or both. Because in medieval sick rooms, people believed the soul could leave the body during sleep. Wander, glimpse heaven or hell or the shadow between. And if the sleep grew too deep, if the breathing slowed, you called the priest for last rites. Because sleep and death weren't far apart, even in language, eternal sleep. Rest in peace. The line blurred. Many died in their beds, eyes closed, breath soft. Others passed mid-dream, unaware, and still. Some returned. Miracle stories often begin with a sleeper, dead for a day, then gasping awake with a tale of golden staircases or lakes of fire. The church loved these stories. So did tavern owners, though their versions included more dragons and beer. You sit beside the sick man now. The nun tending him nods politely but doesn't speak. The candle flickers, and something in the man's breathing changes. Slower, deeper, the fever breaks. He sleeps, not to escape, but to heal. And in that moment, you understand. Sleep, in this room, isn't just for rest. It's hope. Because when nothing else works, when the body fails and herbs sour, when prayers grow tired, sleep is all that's left, and sometimes it's enough. You lie back on a spare cot. The sheets are coarse. The scent of vinegar stings your nose. But you feel warm, tired in a way that feels clean, and you sleep. Not because you're sick, but because for once, it's quiet. And for now, that's enough. You wake to the soft clink of metal, not armor, not coins, something smaller, sharper, a needle perhaps. You blink, eyes adjusting to candlelight, dancing off glass bottles, pewter bowls, and instruments of uncertain purpose. The smell of rosemary hangs heavy in the air, sweetened slightly by the scent of crushed sage and old books. You're in a midwife's chamber. A woman kneels beside a low bed, murmuring to the young mother laboring through shallow breaths. Another helper fans her gently, humming what sounds like a lullaby out of time. A third is mixing something thick and warm in a small pot. And in that bed, between exhaustion and pain, between fear and focus, is a woman who hasn't slept in 2 days. Because now we enter one of the most grueling, intimate, and deeply human chapters of medieval sleep. Childbirth. Not the loud, dramatic scene you'd expect from plays or films. This is quiet, tense, the kind of silence that thrums under your skin. A sleep-deprived waiting room from a time before epidurals, before sterilization, before certainty. You sit in the corner, unnoticed, and you watch. In the Middle Ages, childbirth was dangerous for both mother and child. Complications were common, infection almost inevitable. The Church considered birth both sacred and slightly suspect, life-giving and deeply tied to Eve's original sin. Mothers were often denied confession once labor began, just in case they died without absolution. Imagine trying to sleep with that on your conscience. And sleep, it was rare, precious, stolen between contractions, fragmented into breathless moments where the body went slack but never truly let go. The midwives offered herbal sleep aids, infusions of poppy, anise, chamomile, but none guaranteed peace. One 15th century manual advised singing softly to the laboring woman as she drifted in and out of feverish sleep. Another recommended a warm poultice on the back, to draw down the child and ease the soul. Sometimes they whispered prayers, other times curses, because even the strongest broke under sleeplessness and pain. You glance at the young mother now. She's breathing slower, not asleep, but hovering near it. Her hand curls weakly around the edge of the blanket. She mumbles something. The midwife nods. And just like that, silence. A heartbeat later, a cry. High-pitched, new, piercing in its insistence. The baby is here, not washed, not weighed, not swaddled in sterile linens, but alive. Warm, furious. The mother sobs once, then sinks, at last, into sleep. Not a light doze, not the restless nod of the traveler or the cautious nap of the soldier, but deep, earned, visceral sleep. The kind you only fall into when your body has emptied itself of everything else. Pain, joy, fear, and needs nothing but oblivion. You lie back against the wall, breath caught in your throat. Because in this room, more than any other, sleep is transformation, the final stage of labor, the first moment of peace. A child is carried away to be cleaned. A mother is tucked beneath a blanket. And you close your eyes. There's a softness here you haven't felt in days. Not in the bedding, not in the light, but in the air itself. As if the very walls are exhaling. Because new life has entered. And for once, death is not present. Only sleep. True, deep, sacred. You wake to bells. Not church bells, not warning bells. These are small, delicate, more like chimes than alarms. They tinkle faintly with the breeze, strung from the rafters of a building that smells of incense, damp parchment, and just a hint of goat. You're not in a castle anymore, not in a manor or a monastery. You're in a university hall, and tonight's sleep, it belongs to the scholars, the ones who tried valiantly, endlessly, to understand the world by reading, writing, and occasionally falling asleep face first into their manuscripts. You rise slowly from the creaking cot, set beneath a window so narrow it's more metaphor than ventilation. The sky is a bruised blue, still hung with the stars that scholars would spend hours tracing with fingers ink-stained and sleep-starved. The student across the room is still asleep, mouth open, quill tucked behind his ear. His blanket is a rolled-up robe, his pillow a pile of scrolls. He's drooling on something in Latin. Welcome to the least restful sleep in all of medieval Europe. academic sleep. Because while monks fragmented their sleep in devotion and peasants broke it in labor, scholars sacrificed it for knowledge, for argument, for exams that may or may not involve being yelled at in Latin by a bearded man in a robe. You make your way down a narrow staircase that smells like wax, old boots, and stress. Below, in a candlelit hall, 3 students are already awake, arguing softly over Aristotle and also who ate someone's preserved plums. One is asleep, head in a bowl of porridge. You find a bench and sit, watching them. Sleep here was never guaranteed. Scholars were expected to rise early for matins, study until their eyes blurred, then attend lectures where falling asleep could get you whipped, or worse, questioned by the professor. Sleeping in class? Not a death sentence, but a social one. One account describes a student who nodded off mid-lecture and awoke with 3 fingers in ink and 2 in shame. They slept in narrow beds or on straw pallets in shared halls. There was no privacy, no silence, just the endless, sighing sound of thinking. Many used wine to fall asleep. Cheap stuff, with the occasional surprise insect. Others relied on warm milk and muttered logic syllogisms until unconsciousness mercifully arrived. And yes, they dreamed, vividly, sometimes of divine visions, more often of thesis topics chasing them through forests, while Thomas Aquinas laughed in the background. One student's diary recalls dreaming he was trapped in a cathedral where every book was chained shut. Another dreamed of being naked in front of a tribunal, unable to recite the Pater Noster in Greek. Relatable. But for all the discomfort, the pressure, the lack of sleep, there was something else here, something sacred, curiosity. These young men, and later, a few bold women, studied not for wealth, but for truth. They read late into the night by candlelight that stung the eyes. They whispered theories under the stars. They believed knowledge had weight and learning was a kind of prayer. And even when their heads nodded and their hands dropped quills in exhaustion, they kept going. You lie back now on the bench. The room smells of ash, vellum, and ambition. The bells chime again, softly like laughter, and you fall asleep surrounded by books, some unfinished, some unreadable, all alive. Because even here, especially here, sleep was never just rest. It was recovery, a pause before the next idea, a breath between questions, a moment to forget so the mind could remember. You exhale, and the university hall fades gently, like a footnote at the end of a very long thought. You wake to bells, not church bells, not warning bells. These are small, delicate, more like chimes than alarms. They tinkle faintly with the breeze, strung from the rafters of a building that smells of incense, damp parchment, and just a hint of goat. You're not in a castle anymore, not in a manor or a monastery. You're in a university hall, and tonight's sleep, it belongs to the scholars, the ones who tried valiantly, endlessly, to understand the world by reading, writing, and occasionally falling asleep face first into their manuscripts. You rise slowly from the creaking cot, set beneath a window so narrow it's more metaphor than ventilation. The sky is a bruised blue, still hung with the stars that scholars would spend hours tracing with fingers ink-stained and sleep-starved. The student across the room is still asleep, mouth open, quill tucked behind his ear. His blanket is a rolled-up robe, his pillow a pile of scrolls. He's drooling on something in Latin. Welcome to the least restful sleep in all of medieval Europe, academic sleep. Because while monks fragmented their sleep in devotion and peasants broke it in labor, scholars sacrificed it for knowledge, for argument, for exams that may or may not involve being yelled at in Latin by a bearded man in a robe. You make your way down a narrow staircase that smells like wax, old boots, and stress. Below, in a candlelit hall, 3 students are already awake, arguing softly over Aristotle and also who ate someone's preserved plums. One is asleep, head in a bowl of porridge. You find a bench and sit, watching them. Sleep here was never guaranteed. Scholars were expected to rise early for matins, study until their eyes blurred, then attend lectures where falling asleep could get you whipped, or worse, questioned by the professor. Sleeping in class? Not a death sentence, but a social one. One account describes a student who nodded off mid-lecture and awoke with 3 fingers in ink and 2 in shame. They slept in narrow beds or on straw pallets in shared halls. There was no privacy, no silence, just the endless, sighing sound of thinking. Many used wine to fall asleep. Cheap stuff, with the occasional surprise insect. Others relied on warm milk and muttered logic syllogisms until unconsciousness mercifully arrived. And yes, they dreamed, vividly, sometimes of divine visions, more often of thesis topics chasing them through forests, while Thomas Aquinas laughed in the background. One student's diary recalls dreaming he was trapped in a cathedral where every book was chained shut. Another dreamed of being naked in front of a tribunal, unable to recite the Pater Noster in Greek. Relatable. But for all the discomfort, the pressure, the lack of sleep, there was something else here, something sacred. Curiosity. These young men, and later, a few bold women, studied not for wealth, but for truth. They read late into the night by candlelight that stung the eyes. They whispered theories under the stars. They believed knowledge had weight and learning was a kind of prayer. And even when their heads nodded and their hands dropped quills in exhaustion, they kept going. You lie back now on the bench. The room smells of ash, vellum, and ambition. The bells chime again, softly like laughter, and you fall asleep surrounded by books, some unfinished, some unreadable, all alive. Because even here, especially here, sleep was never just rest. It was recovery, a pause before the next idea, a breath between questions, a moment to forget so the mind could remember. You exhale, and the university hall fades gently, like a footnote at the end of a very long thought.